The next change to the National Construction Code is to do with termite management systems. The termite risk management provisions are located in Volume 1, Part B, Structure, and in Volume 2, Part 3.1.3, Termite Risk Management. Deemed to satisfy provisions are available for termite risk management. However, the requirements in both volumes are heavily reliant on AS 3660.1. There are also a number of termite management systems that have been accredited under the Code Mark accreditation scheme. In 2012, the ABCB agreed to establish a project acknowledging the ongoing review of AS 3660.1, developing additional deemed to satisfy provisions which are not reliant on AS 366.0, and adopting a revised AS 366.0.3 as a referenced document for the testing of products which fall outside the scope of AS 3660.1. Incremental changes have occurred in the NCC in conjunction with the review of the Australian standard. In 2014, the term termite barrier was replaced with the term termite management system to better reflect the range and use of termite systems currently available. For 2015, additional amendments have occurred to the DTS provisions of Volume 2 and AS 3660.214 edition, Part 1 and 3 have been adopted in the NCC. Table 3.1.3.1 has been restructured for clarity to allow alignment with terminology and used in the industry and changes to the standard. An example of this includes the term sheet material to cover termite management systems such as termite shielding and stainless steel mesh. Granular materials, you'll see just underneath sheet material, replaces the previous term of graded stone. An additional option within the NCC has been inserted for sheet material. The provision refers to AS 3660 for termite management provisions for termite shielding. As a consequence of aligning the NCC with the amendments to AS 3660.1, a new clause 3.1.3.4 titled sheet material has been provided. Two options are now available for the use of sheet material. The first is to comply with AS 3660.1, which is the current requirement. The second option is an additional standalone deemed to satisfy provision for suspended floors. The new option applies to the use of galvanised steel ant caps as termite management system. The inclusion of this option means that in certain suspended floors applications, compliance can be met solely through this provision without a reference to AS 3660.1. There's been a couple of changes for chemical systems. In 2015, where a chemical is used, it must now be included on the appropriate authority register. Currently, the appropriate authority is the Australian Pesticides and Veterinary Medicines Authority. This requirement is not new and has always been required under AS 3660. However, this requirement is now elevated into the NCC. Furthermore, AS 3660.3 is now an NCC primary reference document in Volume 2 and provides an additional option for testing of chemical products. This additional option removes the need to comply with AS 3660.1 if a chemical product is tested to AS 366.3 and is listed on the appropriate authorities register. BCA 2015 sees an amendment to clause D 1.6 to clarify that an open spectator stand that accommodates 2,000 people or less is still subject to the exit width provisions of D 1.6. The insertion ensures we are applying effective exit widths for open spectator stands where they accommodate less than 2,000 people. D 1.6e essentially provides a concession in regard to unobstructed exit widths for large open spectator stands due to the nature of the building, which readily allows for smoke and heat to escape in the event of a fire. However, when applying the provisions of D 1.6 to smaller open spectator stands, a difficulty arises. The provisions of D 1.6c and D apply to a storey and a mezzanine. Similar to open spectator stands, both of these are defined terms and effectively exclude an open spectator stand. Consequently, it could be interpreted that the only exit provisions applicable to an open spectator stand with 2,000 people or less seats are 2 1 metre exits as required by D 1.2f. To remove this anomaly, open spectator stands are now include, in addition to storey and mezzanine, in subclauses C and D, as you can see on the slide, which apply to incremental increases of exit widths relative to the increasing population. In recent years, the ABCB has received a number of submissions commenting on the complexity of Part D 2.16 and, to a lesser extent, the provisions of 3.9.2.3 that deal with balustrades and other barriers. A review and restructure of D 1.6 and 3.9.2.3 has been undertaken to simplify and update the provisions. The following slides will discuss the more extensive changes to D 2.16. In particular, you will note a majority of D 2.16 is now displayed in a table format, Table D 2.16a. An excerpt of this table is contained on the slide. Other changes include the provisions now simply refer to a barrier. At BCA 96, the term balustrade was expanded to balustrades and other barriers. The term is considered convoluted and unnecessarily complex. The term barrier was preferred as it captures the term balustrade. At D 2.16 GI and G2A of NCC 2014, a reference to a gradient of 1 in 20 is provided to delineate between a ramp and other surfaces, so to prevent the installation of a lower 865mm barrier where a floor is slightly sloped, e.g. for drainage. The two references to a 1 in 20 gradient became confusing, so only one reference for ramps and 865mm balustrades is contained in the restructured Table D 2.16a for 2015. In the previous D 2.16c2, a reference was made to parts of buildings containing those classes, which was deemed unnecessary, given A 1.7a states that a reference to a building in the BCA is a reference to an entire building or part of a building, as the case requires. So this reference has therefore been removed. To be consistent with other parts of D 2.16 and to reduce the potential for inconsistency in measurement, a reference to permitting a sphere to pass through it now applies to the 300mm restriction on the gap between the vertical balustrades to fire-isolated stairways and ramps. So previously there was no putting in a sphere, fitting a sphere. They've now made that the same as other areas in the NCC. D 2.16H1A in BCA 2014, there was a reference still made to an opening window in a class 7 or 8 and emergency stairs, despite the relocation of all the other requirements for barriers to openable windows going to D 2.24 in BCA 2013. So this requirement has now been moved to include a new subclause E in D 2.24, and similar to other provisions, it now refers to restricting the passage of 300mm sphere. This change to D 3.6, it expands upon the changes made to enhance the emergency egress provisions for people with disabilities inserted in BCA 2013. It was pointed out by some in attendance at the seminar that year that not every building has a floor descriptor best determined by a number. The current wording restricts the ability to use other similar, effective and on some occasions more appropriate descriptors, such as ground level or even mezzanine level. To expand, or the expansion of subclause B in clause BCA 2015 now allows for these options. The BCA now sees the introduction of mandatory sprinkler provisions for new residential aged care buildings. As you'd be aware, this is some connect with the recent tragedies in aged people's homes. An amendment to Table E 1.5 now sees the mandatory requirements for sprinklers whether the residential age building is classified as a Class 3 or a Class 9A. This brings a consistent approach to the existing sprinkler requirements for Class 9C buildings. Those familiar with the application of the BCA to different classes of residential aged care will recognise that the application of sprinklers to Class 3 residential aged care buildings will attract some concession for fire resistance of floors, walls and doors as they currently exist in the BCA for these classes of building when fire sprinklered. Similar concessions will not be applicable, however, to Class 9A residential aged care buildings. This is expected, however, to have minimal impact on the current building trends that favour Class 9C buildings. Also note that the VIC variation Table E 1.5 has been amended and still includes other residential care buildings. Changes to specification E 1.5, clause 2 and 12 have been made to ensure the sprinkler system complies with AS 2118.4 and is connected to a back-to-base system. In BCA 2014, that included some changes to Volume 1 and 2 requiring all smoke alarms in a Class 1 building and all alarms in a Class 2, 3 or 4 sole occupancy unit to be interconnected. The application to the sole occupancy units contained in specification E 2.2a has been amended to clarify that the interconnection does not apply to alarms outside the sole occupancy unit, which possibly could be interpreted from the previous structure of clause 3.